Hi everyone, this video is part of the React Pagination Simplified, and you are here now. Please watch the overview first if you want to know more about the details before we dive in. Remember, I give the link of the playlist and the GitHub link in every part of the series. Right now, we'll do powerful refactor that makes your life much easier. What is refactor? It is a process to make the code more simple and generic, reduce the code duplication. But remember, not all duplication is bad. Okay, let's start from the easiest one. First, let's start by separating the pagination component first. By the way, there's no exact order here to separate the components. I just started from the pagination component for no specific reason. Remember that. Create file pagination component.js. Copy our pagination code. Then declare our pagination component function and paste. Analyze the code and see what parameters that we need to throw to this function. I see two here, page count and the onPage change function. Let's add them as props. Then change the implementation of onPage change using our onPage change prop. And of course, don't forget to import the React Paginate library. I don't know why the lint didn't give any error. Get back to our app.js. Create the onPage change function from our implementation before. Let's try to use it first and make sure it's still working well. Yeah, it's still good. Now, change it to our new pagination component. Leave the page count and onPage change as it is. Try again. Yes, it's working. Nice refactor. Next, we'll separate the user list container to its own component. I think it's good to create a modules folder to store our user list component, so we can organize the files better in the future. But not too detailed. Let's just organize it in the smaller step. Do what needs to be done first. Don't think into the future too much. For now, just put our user list component inside the modules folder. Cut our user list display. I will just use users as our component name and paste into our newly created users functional component. Again, just like before, let's give the parameter it's needed, which is users data. Next, just replace our previous user list display with our users component. Save it and try. It works! Nice! What can we do next that can make it better? Remember our goal. We want to make this page list as modular as possible, so we can create a new list page component just with a few lines. So, if we analyze it more, what is hindering us from making it modular? For me, I see the fetch users function must be replaceable, because in other modules it may not be fetch users, but we can start smaller from the fetch data. It contains the API URL that we need to be able to change for each module, so let's start there. Make our fetch function as a helper module. Create our helper.js file. As usual, copy and paste the function that we want to separate. Just copy all of the fetch user function first. Don't forget to use the export prefix. Create it as a normal function and not an arrow function. Okay, what do we need here to make it usable by any page list module? We already knew that the URL would be generic, so give the URL parameter and replace our URL implementation. If we do this, we can't really know if the fetch will get the URL from the user or not. So let's give a check there. If the user didn't give any URL or empty URL, then give an alert message and return from the function with default value. And at the end, because we're making it generic and reusable, we're not passing any function to set the state here. It's not a good practice. And what's more, you will have a hard time if you're keeping this behavior when you're working with TypeScript. Now, just return our total page and data. Get back to our app.js. Remember our change in URL implementation? We're replacing bracket page into page number. So instead of using the page variable here, we'll be using bracket page. Okay, let's try using our new fetch helper. And we'll try to access it inside on page change. Change it into async because we'll run the logic here for now. And remember that the page access is from 0 index. Let's also change the page default number to be 0, just for making it consistent. Use our new fetch helper, and here I realized that I haven't changed the fetch helper name, but I decided to just rename it later. Catch the total page and data from the fetch helper. Then just set the state here. Now we can remove the fetch user function and use onPage change on the useEffect hook. Let's try. It says the fetch users function is not defined. Yeah, it's just logical. We haven't imported it yet. Let's import it and see what happens. Okay, it's working. But the page change is not working. Do you know why? If you know why, just pause the video first and post it in the comment section. Are you done? Let's continue. What's the easiest way to check the error? Let's start by printing out the data on the console. Let's see what we get here. After trying to change the page, we know that the API always gives the same data. Because of this, we can put our suspicion on the page parameter. And when I think about that, I just remember that the React Pagination library is using page.selected as the page number. Silly me. So, change the implementation of onPage change inside the Pagination component. I think we won't have any problems again. Let's try. Yes, it's working. Remove the user's console log. To make the URL not tied to the fetch function, let's create a URL variable for it. Remove the user's import too. Now, change the fetch helper name into something more generic like fetch datas. And save all files. I said save all files because there's another file that's referencing to this function, so we need to save them all after the refactor process. We've done almost everything we can do to make it more generic and reusable. Next, we'll make the components separated from the core. If you see right here, you can see that actually it's not an app component anymore. We need to make it into a new component. Let's create a component that has a related name to this, which is, I think it's better if we give it users component as the name. Copy our app component there. Clean up the app component. Move the import into users component and call the users component from the app. Whoops! Forgot to export the users component and also change the name. Let's import users component to the app component. And we got an error. It's because our import path isn't right. It's logical because we just cut and paste it from the app without fixing it. Let's fix it now. Yes, it's working well. Now the component is well separated. We can start making it more and more generic by making it a class. Let's do this. We will change the users component from a functional component into a class component. But we want to remove the functional component for learning purposes. Just duplicate the users component and change the name into users component class. Now we need to make the class work. Change all we need to make it into a class format. We need to change the useState into a state inside the constructor. Just like that. And for the useEffect hook, we can use component did mount. The set state usage has become like this. And how to display our page? Just put it inside the render function. change all the variables into states. And don't forget the this keyword, because we are in a class. Use it on our app component. And again, I forgot to change the component name. Import the user component class. We got an error. Let's give the React import right here. Now the pagination is not working again. What's wrong? Pause the video and type in the comment if you already know it. Okay, so the problem is the state. I used the wrong state name. I should use page count here. It's my fault to use an inconsistent name. Don't repeat it, guys. Use a consistent name. Now it's working again. Nice. I think it's time to move our API URL to another place, so it can be easily changed and consistent anywhere we'll use the URL. Let's create an API file. Declare the user's API URL and just use it inside our class. Let's check it. Okay, still working great. Our preparation is done. We can start making the user's component class into a generic component that we can use for any page list component. Are you excited for this? Let's do this. First step, just copy our user's component class and rename it into generic component class. Change the class name and URL to become empty URL. Instead of users, we'll use generic names like datas. And we want to take out the user's component so it can be replaced by any other component. If you remember, the user's component here is just for displaying the data, so we want it to be replaceable with any components that will display the data it needed. To do this, we can just create a function that returns any component we want. Let's call it main component function. Change the user's component with main component function calling. Basically, this is done. We can now change our user's component class inherited from this class. Remove all the code except URL and override the main component function to return users. And again, it's not working. And we already knew. It's because of the import pathing. Let's fix that and try again. Great, it's working pretty well. So you can see here that we only need a few lines to create the page list component. It's generic and reusable. But don't forget something. We hard-coded the total pages in the fetch helper. In a real project, we get this from the API, remember that. Also, one more thing, remember that this is a concept. It's proof that this kind of module can become this simple and reusable for any usage. But you must not forget that in the real list page, There's a search component and it's connected to the paging. So you must analyze it better to do something like this. In the next video, we'll create a new module which has more pages and it will need a break component in the pagination. Remember the break component? We haven't used it. And we'll use it after we create a new module that has more pages than this. I give the next part title Refactor Proofs. Highly reusable and easy to maintain components in action. Thank you for watching, see you in the next part.